Okay, it's going to get warm and we're going to be doing some thinking. So let's get started. Thanks for coming. I'm John Jordan from the province of BC, and my colleagues here are designing the workshop. We're going to run it. I'm going to say a few words. And then we have Ian Costanzo and Stephen Curran. And so we'll just walk you through this whole thing. We're going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing, and then we're going to actually become issuers and like write stuff to ledgers and create companies and issue permits and stuff. It'll be awesome. So this is going to be the sort of the agenda. In the end, we'll have time for some questions and so forth if we need to. This is a document. You need a couple things. One is this document, this URL here is this document. So we have step-by-step instructions. So you don't even have to type almost. You can cut and paste the command line straight into the terminal. And we're using a tool called Play with Docker. So this is a browser-based service where you're going to have a command line available and you're going to be able to run all the software that we have prepared. Google Chrome works best for that, and in order to log into that you need a Docker Hub ID. So that's very simple to do. If you go to this labsplaywithdocker.com, they'll run you through that if you don't already have a Docker Hub ID, and then the rest will show you. I think we have a piece of paper or something around that has these URLs on it.
Yeah, the URL's on the top. How many people have a Docker Hub account already? Fair number probably do.
Yeah.
So this is the official docker.com website. It's their store for all Docker images, so we're not leading you off astray, but I'm sure you'll have to agree to certain things and so on. But it is the Docker website, the official hub site.
So that's okay? People are good with that? So I'm just going to very quickly, I'm not going to repeat I'm going to repeat a little bit, but I'm just going to go quickly through what it is we're doing here today. So I don't know if most of you, some of you came to our talk the other day that was a longer version. So what we're talking about here is, government business issuing capability, so issuing business registration, so incorporation, and issuing permits and licenses. That's the capability. It's to help business people. So we're going to be helping Mary here. That's our goal today. And the main thing we're doing is we're helping Mary through a journey of some permits and licenses. So we're actually going to create these services and a service of your choice, and we're going to guide them through a journey that is dynamically created using Indy-based proofs and proof requests and credentials. So you guys are going to be creating an issuer verifier service. And the holder here in this case is going to be something we call TheOrgBook, which is a public holder of credentials. So you'll be creating a service that is issuing credentials to an OrgBook. And the reason is because we're trying to solve sort of this chicken and egg problem of bootstrapping a network, right? Which is usually very hard because we don't have either side of the network, demand or supply, so we're creating the supply. And this is what it'll kind of look like. You're going to be creating the services and you're going to be issuing to the OrgBook, and then a Mary is going to be able to, walk through that path. We kind of put the label in there. This tool set over the next few months, we're going to do some work on the code, and we are going to contribute it to the Indy project, call it Indy Catalyst. So the code for running that public holder and the code for being able to create issuer verifier just using the very same process, or maybe even better a little later, that you're using today will be available for you to use for any kind of use case scenario that you would like. And then the idea here is, like, what we're doing is, the big picture is we're creating our kind of local neighborhood. Like, we're doing this in BC, but you might do that in Greece, or you might do that wherever. And it doesn't have to be around organizations. It could be around professional accreditation, like medical doctors, engineers, and the like, or teaching credentials. Anytime you have something where you need to hold a whole bunch of credentials, we're going to look at it for mine inspection evidence. So mine inspectors can issue credentials that they've collected evidence from a mine into an internally held system like TheOrgBook, and then later on can be used to prove in the court of law that that was the data that they collected by that person, by that device on that day, in that location, unchanged. And as I mentioned, we'll do this wayfinding business, so you'll see that. It's a nice graph and so forth. And after that, and like I mentioned, these will be the tools Indy Catalyst offers. And then the idea is that if we do this all around the world, then all of our business people and businesses will be able to sort of do business with each other by exchanging these verifiable credentials. That's kind of the vision. So, thanks for letting me say that. I think we're going to hand it off to Ian and Stephen.
Do you want to take questions?
Do we have any questions about that? Yeah, like, is that sort of clear enough yet?
Are we doing this on the testnet?
Sorry?
Are we doing this on the testnet?
On the, what network are we actually using? We're actually running our own right now. So you'll be actually writing the DIDs and schema and so forth to a small Indy network that we're running in DigitalOcean.
And it's got a really cool name, Be Sovereign, which is BCO. So it's BC's version of Sovereign. And again, this is just for our play purposes. The actual TheOrgBook is on Sovereign Network, so it is rooted in Sovereign itself.
So there's no technical difference. It's really just the Genesis file that you use. So you'll be able to use this software to use the real Sovereign network if you like, or your own Indy network as you like. That's just a configuration.
Okay.
But in this case, we're using our own network. And during the course, we actually have built a ledger browser. So you'll be able to use this web-based ledger browser to take a look at your own schema and cred defs and stuff like that.
Okay. Any other questions?
All right, well, we should dive in.
Yeah.
Dive in.
Yeah.
Ready? Let's see if it works.
I mean, this part at least we can do on any.
Yeah, we can do it on any. I mean, I probably should just keep yours.
Yeah.
See, as soon as you plug in the power cord, the signal.
What's that?
When you plug in the power cord, the signal.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll try and see how long.
You gotta try it again. You gotta see this working. Wow.
Very close.
Good.
Engineer.
All right, well,
All right then. During the coffee break, we'll charge up.
we'll see how much power I've got. So has everyone got? So Ian Costanzo, I'm one of the developers. I work with John and Stephen in the province of British Columbia. So has everyone got the bit.ly document open? Everyone got it? It looks like we've got about 40 people with it open, so that's good. And has everyone gone through the Play with Docker?
Yeah.
Not yet?
In the process.
Okay. Good. So the Play with Docker stuff is pretty easy when you set up an account and you just get to the Play with Docker screen. So I'm just going to do a very quick demo of what we've got out there, just so you can kind of see where we're going to go. So. How many people were not at John and Stephen's presentation yesterday? Okay, quite a few. Okay, so I'll just give a very quick demo of the TheOrgBook. This is on the BC Government Test Network, so it's all in test. We're connected to BC Government's Test Sovereign Network, so you don't have to worry about messing anything up. But there's also a lot of kind of junk test data in here because we've been doing a lot of testing throughout the last few days. So if I just do a quick search for ENC, just try and find some companies that I've set up through some of the testing. So what the TheOrgBook is just a kind of a directory of verifiable credentials for organizations within BC, and we can have different issuers that issue into this TheOrgBook. The kind of the root issuer is the BC registry, which is the organization in BC which does the corporate registry, which handles incorporations and other corporate information. So that's kind of the root registry. But then we can have other issuers issue credentials into the same registry. So we can have, for example, labor standards, if there's labor standards credentials that organizations have, or in BC now we've legalized cannabis, so we have retail cannabis sales licenses that can be issued. Mining organization might have certain certificates or credentials that they have to receive in order to be able to run a mine. So the different issuers can issue into this workbook. You can see when you do a search, you can filter by issuer. So if you're interested in credentials that are issued from a specific issuer, then you can filter by that. And when you create an issuer, it will show up in the list, so you can be able to filter on your issuer, so you can see your specific credentials that you're issuing. And then when you drill through to the company, you can see the credentials that are issued. We show it in a timeline because credentials can be reissued. So if you have a credential and then you reissue it, then it'll show as expired, and then the new one will show up. And we'll go through that during the workshop as well. And then there's an issuer page. So there's a page where there's issuer information, and we'll be able to configure some of that information during the workshop. We also have what we call dflow, a distributed flow. Sorry, let me get that. So dflow is kind of a central application that will allow you to look at what credentials you're able to issue and what some of the dependencies are. Because when you're issuing a credential, you can set up dependencies through a proof request. And then when you want to issue a particular credential, then you need to know what are the dependencies that you need to have before you can get the credential that you want. So if we look at, we'll just look at something, we'll look at the dflow examples. So for example, in dflow, we've got a credential called the City of Surrey Business License, and this is an example of someone who wants to open a restaurant. So if we pick that one, then what it does is it goes out to the different agents, and it asks each agent what are the dependencies to get the particular credential that you're asking for, and then it builds a graph. And so when you're an issuer, when you define a dependency, you can define a dependency on a different agent, and then dflow will be able to resolve the different credentials. And then when you click on, so in this case, we want to get a City of Surrey business license. We don't have one, but it depends on a bunch of other stuff that we also don't have. So then within dflow, we can kind of go through the list, and we can build all the credentials that we need in order to get the credentials that we want. So this is just a demonstration. In actual real life, each one of these forms would be a business process within that issuing organization, and then the end result of that is that they would issue a credential. But the dflow kind of gives the business owner an idea of what they need to do in order to get their business license.
Yeah.
Can you briefly state how the dflow app was designed? Like, is there a tool that helped you create these workflows?
It's all custom coded. So the dflow app itself is an Angular application. It queries each of the agents through a web service, and then the web service produces a JSON file that identifies the different dependencies, and then the JSON graph uses, I think, a Python networking library to build the actual dependency.
But it's all but it's not, the flows are actually dynamically generated. So all you need to know as an issuer is what your dependencies are. You don't have to talk to any of the other issuers. So there's no business coordination, no MOUs or agreements.
It's a dependency graph more than an actual work.
It's a dependency graph. It's dynamically generated based on the target you pick.
So part of what you're going to do today in configuring your issuer verifier is you're going to say, well, before I'll issue my credential, I need to verify you already have these credentials. So you're going to do that in the form of a proof request, and we'll do that during this exercise. That's the piece of data that's being chased to figure out what that graph should look like for the tier 1, tier 2.
Right. And proof requests are part of the standard Indy protocol for credentials. So if we're using like native capabilities of the Indy sort of architecture to do this. It was just kind of something we figured out, along the way.
So if I was going to throw a little more context into where we are with the code at this point. So the TheOrgBook itself is deployed as a production app, and the ability to issue credentials to it and for it to do proof requests, all of that is production code and has been released and is being used. dFlow, we had used it originally as a demo, as a static demo, and then just in the last month or two, we built out this dynamic dFlow, which is the ability for it to be dynamic, for it to query into the various issuers that are registered with the TheOrgBook and say, what are your dependencies? Query the credentials that the organization has to figure out what it's already got so we can color the graph properly. So this is sort of brand new stuff.
That's more experimental, this.
So that's a little experimental. Definitely looks a lot rougher than you're going to see in the TheOrgBook. So I just wanted to give that, and as we go forward on these things.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah,
Some rough edges.
the other thing to keep in mind is there are a couple of features, we'll call them, of dFlow. So if we run into those, then forgive us for it not being perfect yet.
We've run this workshop with, what, 6 people before. We've never run it with quite this size of a group. So
Yeah,
it's
actually-
interesting to see everyone going forward on it.
Yeah, so I guess that's the other thing. So it's mainly configuration. So the agent that we're going to be is primarily configuration. That's all we're going to be going through is just configuring different things within the agent. We've run the kind of trial version of the workshop with developers and BAs. So anyone who's reasonably comfortable doing cut and paste and kind of mimicking commands that we tell you to type in is pretty good. The first workshop that we did with technical and non-technical, like all 10 people made it all the way through the workshop, but it was a little bit smaller crowd, so we had a little bit more ability to kind of do individual help. If we run into something we don't have time to make it all the way through, I'm going to be just kind of hanging around this afternoon if you've got questions, or we're doing the workshop again tomorrow. So just to give you a very rough idea what we're doing, the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to run the agent, and the agent has a bunch of sample schemas already in place. So we'll run it, we'll load the schemas, we'll register them on the TheOrgBook, and we'll create some credentials. And then we're going to create some new schemas. We've got the example schemas already, so we're just basically cutting and pasting. And then for example 2 and example 3, there's a little bit of editing. So we're not going to get too much into the technical detail of what the configurations look like in editing them. We're trying to keep it relatively straightforward and then just get something up and running. So the first one we're going to do, we're going to install and run the Vaughan agent. And it's in GitHub repo. So I'll just show you the fact that there's a GitHub repo. It's under BC.gov. There's a lot of stuff under BC.gov. You can also run, like everything that we're going through, you can run standalone on a machine, and all the code's available on BC.gov repos. So if anyone's interested in actually running a standalone TheOrgBook and everything else, then just ping one of us, and we can kind of point you to directions to do that as well. So play with Docker. Everyone ready to go with play with Docker? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, like for each of the slides, I'm just going to run through the slide quickly, just to kind of show you. And there's some of the things, there's just a couple of little, it might not be documented perfectly, so I'll just show you and then we'll get you guys to run through and do it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up a new shell and then just do a git clone on our repo. So we'll open up a new shell. So we start a new instance. We click on Add New Instance. It'll give us a new... Has anyone used Play with Docker before? Play with Docker is really cool.
It's pretty awesome.
It's all... The software is all available too, so you can actually run your own Play with Docker on your own environment if you really are so inclined. So then we just copy the git clone, which clones the repo. It's pretty fast because it's mainly just a configuration, and then we just cd into the Vaughan agent template directory. And then we've got the repo available. So maybe if anyone, like once everyone's done that, then put up your right hand, and if you've got a question, then put up your left hand.
No, both hands.
That's protocol.
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to rush through it too quickly, but I want to, you know, kind of try and march through it as well. So, show of hands. Everyone is good? Okay. And if you want, if you want some specific help, Stephen or John can come and
Climb over tables and we'll.
Okay, so the next step one of the things we need to configure is the host that we're running our agent on. And that's how dflow basically can communicate with the different agents, is it needs to know the host name so that it can call the services. When you set up an agent, it comes with some HTML or some web-based UI so that you can enter credentials, but it also sets up some web services. So the way that we get the host in Play with Docker is we grab this SSH command, we just click on this copy. It doesn't give you any feedback to say that it's copied, but it has. And then when we open up the editor, we go to the set host.sh. And then we take this, there's a export endpoint host equals your Play with Docker hostname. So we'll just paste what Play with Docker gave us. And then we just need to make a couple of changes to it. We need a host name, not an SSH command. So we take the @ sign that's in the middle and we change that to -5001. And then we get rid of the actual SSH. And then that's the host name. So Play with Docker has kind of a pattern for how it generates the host names, and one of the things that it uses is the port number that it's exposing, and we're running on port 5001.
Press save.
And then save that. So there's an example in the documentation. So the SSH command, so it gives you the SSH command, and then it shows you what the actual command looks like in the document. So the things that we've substituted are 5001, and then we got rid of the SSH. Everyone good? This step's a little bit confusing. If you get the host name wrong, you can fix it later on, but it's needed to get all of the interaction working with Play with Docker. Everyone good? Anyone good?
You're gonna run the command.
Yeah, so then the last step to actually set the host name is you run space set host.sh. We're setting an environment variable here. So then when you run env, then you can see that the environment variable we've set this value here for endpoint host.
No.
If anyone knows of an easier way to do this, to get the host name from Play with Docker, let me know, because we haven't found one. Okay, who's good so far?
So is anyone having trouble with Play with Docker? You win. Are you using Chrome?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay, then.
Yeah. Sorry. You know what? That's it.
Huh? There's no one. It's no one, because it doesn't know the host name until it knows what port it needs to export. So, okay. Okay, has everyone got Okay, so env and then endpoint host equals. Who's got that? Okay, we'll give everyone like maybe another minute.
And a bit of a network.
There's a bounty of a case of beer for anyone who figures out a better way to do this. Okay, is someone having trouble that they need? Anyone else need a hand or?
How do we know where this works? Can I see why you're... Okay. You are circling very quickly. Start again. Everyone good over here? Anyone have any questions? Yeah. Where's your slide? Yeah, no. There we are. I think that's easier. It's so funny, I keep doing the same thing. I keep trying to get backspace.
Always wanted to .ca, I've got
Somebody have that piece of paper with the website actually. Just pass it back.
Okay, I think we're going to continue in about 1 minute. If you don't get the endpoint host right, it's not the end of the world. Most of the stuff will still work, and you can fix it later. So, like I say, I will personally buy someone a case of beer if they give me a better way of doing this host thing. So then the next thing we're going to do, actually, sorry, so who's done now? Show of hands. So most people, I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds.
Machine people have already gone about 14 steps ahead.
Have they? Well, that's fine. If anyone wants to just work ahead, then go for it. Question over here?
Well, just to comment on the next slide, it doesn't tell you to CD into the directory where the service is done.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you use the play with Docker editor, then you can just stay in the Docker directory, and you can use the play with Docker editor and open the different files. So that's. Okay, so I'm just going to start going forward, and if anyone's stuck, then we can still help you out. But I just want to kind of move forward with this. So the next step is we're going to run an initialization script, and what this is going to do is it's going to customize all of the different configuration files for your issuer, because we've got about 50 issuers here. You have to have unique schema names and a unique issuer name in order, like we're all issuing into the same workbook, so we just need to make sure we're unique here. So what the init.sh does is it does some of that uniqueness. It also creates a DID for your issuer and registers it on the B-sovereign network.
So this is where you're actually creating a DID. It's going on the network. So you're going to have your own decentralized identifier that will last as long as we don't reset the network.
Yeah, so you just run, and so you're in if you're in the Vaughan agent template directory, you run ./init.sh, and it asks you for a name for your organization. So this is the name that's going to go into all of your schema names. So it needs to be just a string, no spaces, and something that's going to be unique. So I always use my name, the date, but you don't have to use the date. I'll use my birthday, August 4th, _ issuer. So Ian Co, August 4th issuer, nobody's done that one before. Nobody take that one's for me. So it actually calls a couple of web services on B-Sovereign to register my DID. This is the other area where we had issues in the other workshop where with 50 people doing it, we were getting some timeouts, but eventually it should all work. So it registers my DID, and then it goes through and it customizes all my configuration files. And then what we're going to do next is we're just going to take a look at the ledger, and we're just going to go through the configuration files. We're not going to do a lot of editing, but I just want to give you guys kind of an idea of what the configuration is, so you can see, just kind of get an understanding of what are some of the things you can configure when you build one of these agents. The idea for the agent is that we want to do it primarily through configuration. You can define new schemas and everything, decide what network you want to join. And then, most of the program is going to be on most issuers have their own applications that are going to be doing most of the work, and then just calling web services on the agent. So that's kind of the design. Has anyone actually gone through this step yet and created a DID? Cool.
It's just us that can.
So while this is running, and you've probably also gone this, I'm going to skip ahead a step and just go to the ledger. So if you go to slide 11, it's got a link to our ledger browser. So if you open up the ledger browser, I'll just do this. Okay, so here it's registered my DID. So it creates a seed using the issuer name that I just typed in. It creates a DID and a VerKey based on that, and it registers it on the network, or on the ledger. So it's done that, and now what it's doing is it's going through and it's trying to read my DID back. So while it's doing that, I'll just go through the, so this is our ledger browser. I don't know if anyone's seen it before. John demoed it yesterday, but it shows we've just got a simple network with 4 nodes, 4 validator nodes. You can look up the Genesis transactions. You can actually register a DID through the browser interface. So
Can
the
you repeat what a DID is?
oh,
A DID is a decentralized identifier. So this is an identifier that's a GUID that is in a W3C spec that's evolving. And the DID is resolved to usually a blockchain, which returns to you a document that contains information about the DID that is created by the owner of the DID. So basically, you create your own DID, and then you associate with it primarily a key. So you retain the private key, but you put the public key into the DID doc, and you put an endpoint into the DID doc. And that, basically, those two things at the core. There's other pieces to it, but those two pieces allow somebody else who has that DID to resolve that, get the DID doc, get the public key, and get the endpoint, and now they can talk to you. And so if you've got somebody else's DID and they've got your DID, you can now have an end-to-end secure conversation and verify that the person really is who you think you're talking to, because you've got proof through the signatures through the private public key exchange. And that's the basis of the credential exchange.
thanks, Stephen. So then the other thing you can do in the Ledger browser is if you click on the domain link near the bottom, then you can actually browse the ledger and see all the transactions. So it'll show you all the transactions in pages of 10, so you can page through everything. Or you can search for specific types of transactions. So when we create our DID, I think it's a NIM transaction.
It is.
So if we look at NIM, then it'll just show us the NIM. I think this is just good because of the volume of people we've got on it. Or, when we get around to registering schemas, you can search by schema. Or if you want to search by filter, then if you've entered a unique name for your organization, then you can just type that in, and then it'll do a search. I'm not sure where we're getting these
Anybody
errors.
else have any trouble reading that note status?
Again. Okay. That is probably low, I'm guessing, but we'll see. It's odd. I wouldn't have expected it there. It's not a place I expected.
Yeah, I think,
It's a challenge. See, this thing is trying to loop through.
yeah. Has anyone gotten past this step? Okay.
So it did scroll through and gave you back, said it's done.
It said all the files have been updated to
Yeah.
etc.
Okay.
Yeah. So while this, I think it's just the volume. It's a test sovereign network. I'm sure if we were running on the test sovereign or the live sovereign, we wouldn't be having this. But it's just a rinky-dink little Indy network that we got running back in BC.
Yeah.
I shouldn't call it rinky-dink, but obviously. So while this is running, I'll just go through some of the other configuration that we've got. If you're at this stage, which is like if you're at the same stage I'm at, make sure you don't edit any of your configuration files or don't save anything, because this is going to go through and edit them all for you. So you can look at them, but then refresh, reopen them. So if you click on editor,
Anyone who has passed this step can continue on. So.
Yeah.
But if you haven't gotten, if it hasn't completed, then don't.
Hey, Stephen.
Yeah.
I think it's having some trouble registering the schema.
Yeah, I think the ledger
Do you
is.
think it's going to recover, or do we need to
I don't know, wait at back home. What time is it back home? So if you go into the Von agent template, Von X agent config directory, then there's 4 configuration files that you use to configure the agent. So the first one, settings, it just identifies what network you're connecting to. So it's got the URLs for the OrgBook. It's got your wallet seed. You can see that the wallet seed, once the initialization step finishes, this will be the seed based on your organization name. And then it's got the link to the Indy network. So the auto register, when you're running this standalone, you can auto register.
You're getting a 500 error
Yep. Yeah, I'll log into the OpenShift.
Okay.
Actually, it's up to DigitalOcean.
Okay. Anyway, I'll just keep going. Some of the keeners kind of made it through. So, like I said, I'll be around this afternoon, and we're doing the workshop again tomorrow. Maybe we can beef up our network tonight. So we can connect to an Indy ledger, or I guess a sovereign ledger. And if you're running standalone, if you've got everything on your own machine, you can set it up to auto-register your DIDs. But because we're connecting to a shared network, we've got the separate registration step. So we've got a couple of networks that we've got back home. So then the next file to look at is the schemas. And the schemas is essentially a schema for each of the credentials that you want to issue. It's basically just a list of attributes. Indy doesn't have a structure for the schema yet. So we've just got a list of attributes. So we've got the name of the schema. The path is the path that shows up if you want to edit it in the browser. So it's appended to the browser. So you can specify how you want to be able to link to your credential. And attributes. So then there's different types of attributes. Name and address are things that the OrgBook understands. Because we've got a very specific kind of organizational structure that we're dealing with, we know what a name and an address look like. The other ones are just kind of generic, text, date, and select. And then helper means we want to have the ability for the agent to auto-generate some values, potentially. If you're connecting through one of your own systems and just calling web services, then you probably don't want to do any of this. But just through the UI for demonstration purposes, some of the fields we can auto-generate identifiers, for example, is what we use the helper UUID for. So that's the schema.
Yeah, we have maxed out the CPU that we have, so I'm going to see what I can do about. We're on. Whose DigitalOcean expertise is in the room?
Is there a doctor in the house?
Okay, so then the next file is the services.yaml, and what the services does is it defines the different services. It configures the services for your issuer. So it defines some other things that you want to connect to. It defines your wallet. You keep a local wallet with the credential definitions that you're issuing. And then it's also got a section for each of the credentials. So there's some additional information over and above what's in the schema that you can configure in terms of how the service processes your schema. And then the last one is routes. And routes is, again, it's some specific information for each schema in terms of the web UI that we display. So there's some information that's displayed on the web, and then there's some information that's used to render the web page. So there's some duplication between these, like each of the three files, the schemas, the services, and the routes each have the list of attributes with some different information. So we're actually building a tool, or we're going to build a tool for generating these schemas. So we're not going to go into detail about how this, like what all of the schema does. There's going to be a tool for that. But just to let you know that when we're actually editing, they need to be consistent. And that's why we've built kind of examples that we just cut and paste. And each of the files, when we're cutting and pasting, each of the files has a block that says to do insert here. So when we're cutting and pasting, we'll just insert into that particular block in the file.
So this part though is like by editing those files, or later when we have a better UI, if you want to create your own demo environments for your own business or whatever you're administrating, you can put like these web pages. You don't have to have it much fancy. You can just configure this and you'll have a web page for them. So you can simulate like a whole variety of issuers and create your own system just with the tools you're having today, which is quite a great sales tool, I gotta say, because they're able to do this really quickly, spin up a whole environment and steal a few logos from here and there. And
Do you switch to
have a whole.
I can switch to local. So,
So I think what we do is Ian switches to local so we can show it. And then those that have gone further can try to continue. I cannot resize the thing on the fly. I have to stop it and then resize it to give it more CPU. And we are literally, we've been at 100%.
And if we stop it, then steps, or does it retain state?
I think if,
We would retain state, but I'm not sure the ramifications of it. I've not done it, so.
yeah, so I think what we'll do, like Steven suggested, I'm going to switch to local, so I'll be able to go through and just show the steps. You can follow along. Like I said, I'm going to be around this afternoon. If you can ping me on whatever, however you want to ping me, I'll be around. Or we're doing the workshop tomorrow. We're going to beef up our network.
We will beef up the network before tomorrow?
And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to record a video of this process and then post it up on vonx.io. So like after the workshop, if you want to try it, then you'll be able to try it. And plus you can reach any of us on Rocket Chat, on the Hyperledger Rocket Chat. So I will now switch over to local mode just to demonstrate this.
So just so you know, one other thing, he's about to go into a full Docker, so now he's running everything, the network, the 4 nodes, the workbook, everything is going to be running locally on his machine on Docker. That's actually a really simple setup to do, so those who do decide they're more interested in this, that are interested deeply enough, you'll want to, this is the way to go.
But for the people who have made it through to the next step, the one important thing to do is in your services file, open up your services.yaml, and there's an issuer name. The issuer name will show up on the issuer page in the OrgBook. So it's important it'll still work, but to actually be able to see your stuff, you should change the issuer name to, again, something unique for you. So I could say Ian Costanzo,
People like
issuer,
do a control C and
They probably, yeah, you could, what did they, Ian? Do a control C?
yes, do a control C.
Yeah, anyone who hasn't gotten through it yet, go ahead and do a control C, see if that backs off the load.
Yeah, maybe we can have like coupons, and we'll hand coupons around, and people can individually. Okay, so I'm now gonna. Okay, so if you've gotten this far.
one files is starting to go through stuff.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to switch to local mode. Let me actually.
So what was the point of changing that name?
Because that name, when you look at the credentials in the OrgBook, then it shows who the credential was issued by. So that name shows up as the issuer name in the OrgBook.
And what is the OrgBook?
The OrgBook is it's the public repository of credentials that we're issuing. So when you're issuing, so the way we're setting up the environment is we have a public repository of credentials, verifiable credentials, and then issuers can issue into the OrgBook, and then it can be used as a public verifier as well. So it's kind of a transitional step because there's not widely available Indy software out there right now, so companies don't have their own wallets, individuals don't have their own wallets, but we want to be able to support issuers to be able to start issuing verifiable credentials. So we have a public wallet, essentially a community wallet that these issuers can issue to.
Okay, so when I issue a transaction subsequent to my editing that, is that
Sorry.
I'm not ready to be ready through which is another agent in the system.
okay.
So what we were doing when you registered your DID,
Yeah.
that's right into a blockchain. The DID goes to blockchain. When this agent actually starts up, it has a schema and what's called a credential definition, which is the schema describes the attributes of the credential you're going to issue. The credential definition ties that schema to your DID, connects those together, and from that point on, you can issue credentials. But the only thing that's gone on the ledger are basically those three things tied to the credential. So when we use the OrgBook, as we call it, we issued 1.4 million credentials from BC registries to the OrgBook. We still only use those 3 transactions on the ledger. Everything else was peer-to-peer of credentials from BC registries, issued to the TheOrgBook as the holder. And then when a verifier wants to connect it, they receive the proof of the credential, and the only thing they need to do is go check, oh, who was the issuer? I'll check the credential definition, and that'll also tell me what the schema is for this credential. So that is the only thing you're looking at on the ledger. So what we would like to do is be able to show you the ledger so we can show you that actually what goes on the ledger is very little. It's a tiny bit of stuff. The main data is the credential, which is the data that is going from the issuer to the holder, which in this case is the registry is going to the TheOrgBook, and the TheOrgBook is the holder from then on.
Just to confirm what we're running on our environments, is it curl that's issuing REST API commands to the TheOrgBook to actually close those credentials? I'm not seeing the SDK in the agent software.
The agent software, we've embedded the Indy SDK in the agent software. So it's the thing that's receiving the JSON that you're curling. So it's got a REST interface, passing the JSON in, then it's taking it.
The endpoint that the TheOrgBook is hosting, and that's where the Indy SDK is installed.
It's both in the issuer and in the holder.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we wrote a whole bunch of software on top of the SDK that has the concepts of issuer, verifier, holder, mover.
Yeah.
So
You're actually running it on your instance of Play with Docker. You're running the Indy SDK.
Okay.
And it's talking, and then it's talking to the same equivalent software on the TheOrgBook, which also has a copy of Indy SDK. And as necessary, they go to the ledger to read whatever they need to in order to exchange a credential.
Okay.
So as
That
a
makes sense?
developer, you don't need to know anything about that. You just need to know how to do RESTful service development.
Okay, so the Indy SDK is part of the Docker image that we
Yeah.
Exactly. When we downloaded the Docker image, when we did the .manage build, that brought in an image which had baked into it the Indy SDK plus the wrapper we put around it.
Except we haven't done that step yet.
Somehow.
So the next step, assuming you've made it through and registered your DID on the network, then the next step is you CD into the Docker directory. And I'll just show you, there's basically two commands in there. There's a Docker compose. So the Docker compose is used for building and running the images. There's about 3 or 4 Docker containers that you'll boot up. And the manage script is just a script that controls everything, starts everything up and down, and then sets the environment variables. So I'm running locally, but if you do a manage build will do the build. So what the manage build does, it'll look a little bit different when you run it on Play with Docker because it has to download everything. But it downloads a base image which has all of the Indy stuff on it. It's got the Indy SDK, it's got the Python wrapper, and it's got a whole layer of code that we've written, Von Anchor and Von X, which is all of the base agent functionality. So that all comes in a base Docker image. And then when you run your agent, then it basically puts a layer of configuration on top of that. So is anyone able to run the managed build?
For like, if it's factor in the errors, you can't save the ledger.
Yeah. You've done the .manage start. Yeah. So what's happening is that's trying to register your schema and trying to register your thread depth, and that's, again, talking to the ledger. It's the ledger right now. We've got 4 nodes running on a very moderate DigitalOcean, and that's where we're dying. I mean, we could.
How many? Yeah, I guess if the people,
You're right, they're not going to be able to get past that.
yeah.
So.
Okay.
One question. Here in slide number 11, we're searching for the ledger. Which means it's already registered. So why are we doing this manage build again?
Well, you have to build the agent software on your local machine. So when you run an agent, you've got a piece of software that's running. It's providing a web interface to be able to enter credentials. It's also providing a bunch of web services. So the managed build will download the software and build a bunch of local Docker containers for you. And then, so you need that software installed. It's essentially installing the software in your machine. So you need to run that install in order to be able to run an agent. You have to have the software locally. And then when you do a managed start, what it does is it starts up those Docker containers.
That uses the DID which is registered with the network, and then tags with that?
Yeah, so the DID is registered on the sovereign network, so that registers your identity on the network. When you start up your software, it also knows the identity, so it knows the identity that it can connect to on the network. When you start up the software, it registers your schemas and it registers your credential definitions. So those are registered against the identity that you created in the first step.
There was a URL to this thing, so that you can call the agent.
Yeah.
Going down.
So I will just do so I did a manage build, I'll do a manage start to bring up my containers. So there's 3 containers that it starts up. One of them is a Postgres database, which is the local wallet. One of them is the actual agent, and then there's a caddy proxy, which I don't really know anything about the caddy proxy that's there.
Yeah.
So each organization in the network has to run its own infrastructure and keep it alive.
Yes.
Not
Yes,
the network.
So the idea here, not a network, but just
Not just this.
Yeah.
The
The
agent
idea
has
of-
to be kept alive.
Right.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do, our thoughts on this is to, each service is issuing credentials. It's kind of like they print it. They print it so so the business can put it on the wall. This acts kind of like a printer driver that prints the credential and fires it off to the appropriate places. For now, the only place they can send it to is the TheOrgBook. In the future, they can send it to the organization so they have it themselves.
So you could put this in Kubernetes.
Yeah, all of our stuff is running in OpenShift, which is Kubernetes. So yeah, we're running that, and that's where we're getting scale and things like that.
So every issuer has to run this application?
Yeah, every issuer would run this.
And every person as well, or only the issuers?
So this is for someone who's issuing a permitted license. So yes, they would issue it. The organization would run some sort of wallet, generic, what we hope would be a generic wallet product. So we're not making a wallet, something to hold credentials. We're doing this community one. But once organizations have their own agent that holds their credentials, then they would use that. So the organizations would use it.
So currently we're using a generic wallet.
What's that?
In this example, I'm using a generic wallet.
As I say, what we're using is what a thing called the TheOrgBook. Does anyone know why it's called TheOrgBook? Because it's the Facebook. Nice. Did you read that before? Anyway, so eventually we hope to drop the and become
It's
Org.
dropped. It's now OrgBook BC.
Two-word dropped. So the idea there is no organizations have wallets, so all these issuers wouldn't have anywhere to send a credential to. So we created the TheOrgBook for public credentials so that they could issue it to the TheOrgBook. And that starts them on their process of being able to issue it out to the public.
Eventually you assume public LRM wallets.
Exactly. As soon as the public gets the wallet, well, they've already got this agent that they've installed, and that agent will be able to issue
Well,
them.
in this case, we're talking about companies having wallets. The credentials, we're issuing credentials about companies. So the companies would have their own wallet that we could issue credentials to. And then they could take their credentials and they could go to the bank and they could say, I want to open a bank, or they could go to the city of Surrey and say, I want to open a restaurant, and they could present directly the credentials that they've gotten from the BC registries and the provincial sales tax and all the other ones. But right now, because they don't have a wallet, we're putting them in the TheOrgBook. So the business would go to the city of Surrey and say, oh, I've got these credentials, and then the city of Surrey could validate against the TheOrgBook that those credentials exist.
Doesn't it say something about the revokes, because you have this hierarchy of relationship between them? So if one is revoked, are you able to go back and say,
no, it doesn't.
Those are also not valid anymore?
No, not right now, I don't think.
What's that?
Well, so let me just, hold that thought. Let me just go one step further. So I've started up, I've loaded everything in my local, I've registered my local credentials with my local TheOrgBook. So now when I open up my local D-flow, I've got credentials that are showing up in here for my test organization, which is what it's called when I run everything on my local. And I've got 4, so for the first step, I'm issuing everything. I'm not interacting with a bunch of different agents, it's just me, because I want to be able to stand up a demo that I can run without having a lot of dependencies. Issuing something that depends on another agent is the next step in the workshop. But so for the first one, it's all my org credentials. But when I select one and say begin, then it shows the dependencies. So I want to create this credential, but I need to have these 2 beforehand. And for these 2, I need to have the first registration credential. So the question is, if I go through and I create all of these, so now I've got a my test organization, and then let's say I've got, these are tax and liquor. Let's say I violate my liquor rules and they revoke my liquor license, then does that, what's the status on the my test organization credential?
So that's one of the reasons. So we called it originally the OrgBook as a bootstrap or as a catalyst for getting this going. And we thought it wouldn't last because once the organizations have their own wallet, they wouldn't need the OrgBook, right? But then we realized exactly the problem you're talking about, which is, hey, I've verified a credential a while back, and it changed. How do I get notified? And today, there's really no mechanism. So what we're going to build into the OrgBook is a change notification mechanism, so that when an issuer reissues a credential and says, hey, that's revoked, or they revoke it, other organizations that have used that credential can subscribe to them and get notified, hey, that credential just changed. You might want to do something. So it'll be a webhook, basically, that says, hey, whichever credential you subscribe to, when it changes, we'll tell you it changed. And then you can do whatever you need to do. And we think that's going to make again, added value for the issuers, because now they've got a mechanism to communicate change. And for those who work in government, that is not an easy thing to do. It's just, there's not a coordinated mechanism to say, hey, an address changed, I want to change that everywhere. All of the environments, all of the systems have different mechanisms for doing that. We think this can be a super easy, lightweight way to enable that kind of functionality.
And just
we will use the same mechanism for the expirations, expiration dates.
Yeah, so just one extra note on that. Like the dependencies, it's really also a business decision what the dependency is, right? So if I open a restaurant and I lose my liquor license, then can I still run my restaurant without selling liquor? Well, that's something that might be different from one jurisdiction to the next. The city of Surrey might say, well, you can still run your restaurant, but you can't sell any liquor. And some other jurisdiction might say, well, you violated your liquor license, so we're going to shut you down for 2 months. So
I think you're proposing an awful lot of value in the OrgBook, which is wonderful. But I don't yet see the value then of a business ever wanting their own wallet. There's more value in having an OrgBook where you can publicly see it. I'm not quite sure why a business would ever want their own wallet.
Yeah, it might depend on the business. The advantage for the business is if they have their own wallet and they're holding their own credentials, then they can present those without having to go through the OrgBook, right? Having a centralized OrgBook.
But then no one else can get an update when their credentials change, right?
They may have private credentials too, like with insurance or things like this. Like ultimately, they'll want peer-to-peer interact amongst themselves. They might sign a contract between themselves. But the foundation of trust that exists because they can prove that they are incorporated entities in the jurisdiction and in good standing means that helps them have a contract with each other.
So could you issue them to the private wallet and the public wallet?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Okay, got it.
And not only that, so the other example is they can take their registration and use it at the bank. And the bank's not issuing anything to the OrgBook. That's all, that's their own stuff. So again, they can use it. So we're trying to build up a need for it. Create a need, if you will.
Why would somebody trust private wallet?
What's that?
Why would somebody, for example, you said a state website?
Can I just want to, like some of these kind of philosophical questions about why people want wallets and why they don't, maybe we can take those kind of questions offline because we're trying to get through a demonstration of how to configure an agent. I mean, whether you want one or not, some people might and some people might not. I think it's kind of out of the scope of our workshop here.
So the last stop, talking to you about that after, because this construct of the workbook is actually really useful in the governance of lots of different kinds of credentials. So there's lots of reasons that this is really helpful.
If you're interested in those kind of questions, definitely like go on to the Hyperledger Rocket Chat, and there's people who love to talk about this kind of stuff like all day. So anyway, just kind of to reset, I'm running everything on my local. I've set up I've showed you the local dflow. I just want to kind of show you what's an agent that we're actually running. So if you notice here, my agent on my local host, I'm running on port 5001. So I've got localhost 5001. And then I showed you in the configuration, when we configure the schemas, each schema has a URL to it. So the first one is my org incorporation. So if I go to localhost 5001, my org incorporation, then my agent will build this web page for me so that I can enter a credential, a registration credential for an organization. You can go back through the configuration and you can see how all of this is configured. But so I've got a registration type, a legal name. I'll set up something called Ian Workshop Company. And attention to Ian, I'll put in my address of Fake Street. And then I set an effective date. So I can decide when I issue a credential when I want it to be effective as of. Or if I don't, then by default it just uses current date. So I'll set it for December 1st, just for example. So then when I submit, then it comes up and it gives me a success back and it says success true, I've registered this credential on the ledger. So then I can go into my OrgBook, which is on local 8080, and I can look up this credential, whatever I called it, Ian Workshop Company. And I can see that there's a credential that's been issued by my test organization. So this is the name, when you edited the services.yaml file, this is the name that you entered. So obviously, with 50 people, you want something that's unique. And then when you go to that page, then it shows you a little bit of information about the organization. That's the rest of the information that's configured in that services file. So if I go back to the organization, then you can see the timeline, the registration, or the effective date is December 1st, which I set up. So then if I want to go to the next credential, which is tax, so if I say I want to issue now a tax credential, then it comes back with an error message and it says, sorry, we're not able to issue a tax because we don't know who you want to issue it for. So if you want to issue a credential that's got dependencies based on a proof request, then you need to tell the agent who you're issuing it for. And you can either provide the organization ID, so I can, on the URL here, I can say, I can add some URL parameters. I can say !, organization ID, or I can tell it the list of credentials that I want to use to satisfy the dependencies for the proof request. So the web page that you get through the agent has some control over whether it'll let you issue credentials based on whether there's existing credentials or not. So how do you find that out? Well, you look in the OrgBook and you get all that information and you put it in the URL. Or the other way to do it is, that's one of the things that dflow does. So now if I come back to dflow and I say I want to issue my credential, which is the one with all the dependencies, I can select Ian Workshop Company. And then when it builds the dflow, so this is talking to my agent now. dflow is a central dflow, and my agent is serving these requests. Hopefully it's actually going to work. Exception while handling a request, that's not good. So let me just do this again. I'll create a new company for that one. This is one of the things we warned you about. So if I'm creating a new company, then it just links to my company. I'll create Ian Company 2 for workshop. Let's try this one. Oh, the other thing to point out in dflow, because on the ledger there's going to be a lot more schemas. So you can type in the name of your schema and it'll filter. So that's, I'll try it with this other company, company 2. That doesn't look good. Oh, I think it's time for a coffee break.
I was just about to say the same thing. Any other questions before we have a break?
Okay, how are you planning to manage changes in Indy? So when Indy will evolve, if you are running things in production,
Yeah,
what
so-
are your thoughts on that?
So the way we're dealing with it now is we've got this layer in between, and basically that is controlled in that. So we've got, that's a specific project basically in and of itself. And then what we do is we upgrade the Docker image upon which all these are based. So
But in terms
basically,
of the ledger,
it is also version, so basically using version control that way. So the dependencies, the library dependencies are controlled. And so you would manage it just the way you would manage versions of Python or versions of a library you're using in Python or anything else.
So you're talking about the ledger?
Yeah, the
Not
ledger.
talking about the software?
Yeah, no,
So you will just start from zero, so you will have version 1 ledger, and then you will
Yeah.
start with the version
I mean,
2
the ledger-
and there will be some connector between the ledgers, or
No,
what are you
no.
going to do?
The ledger that's running is the public sovereign ledger.
Yeah.
So when they upgrade, there's no, like, unless they do a breaking change, which you're not gonna do, right?
At some point, there's
You know, like, the data on the ledger is immutable and forever, so the schema and stuff will be readable by the Indy software.
yeah, like we've, for the
protocols
Oracle.
will be updated through the Indy SDK. So maybe if you want to support a new protocol, then you've got to update your agents, right? But that would be normal software production, like Steve was describing. But there's only one ledger, and it'll always have to be backwards compatible.
Okay, so there will be multiple APIs to access different ledgers.
Yeah, so one of the things they've got is versioned APIs. Version, we were using 1.3 originally, we bumped to 1.6 to talk to the ledger. We will have to deal with issues like that, and that's one method of retaining. But as Sean said, the ledger is immutable. We've written our data, so for, we've got schema out there that we're using and we're supporting, and Nathan and Phil are going to make sure that we're able to use those schema and credential defs from now on, right?
The transactions on the ledger themselves have versions in them, so even if we upgrade the transactions to do new things, the old versions will still be something that the API can talk about.
And you've got, as I say, about 3 layers between what we're playing with here that will manage that version.
And the Catalyst project will be tracking those changes
Exactly.
too, and that helps.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
don't have to do all this on your own.
Yeah.
So if you use this, software as Catalyst, then Catalyst would keep sync with the latest changes to SDK. Like, when revocation was supported, we updated to that. Like, when predicates were supported, we updated to that, and then we got predicates and we mirrored the.
So then when we come back, what we're going to be going through is actually looking at what the data structures around credentials look like, what the data structures around proof requests look like, and how you're able to create those, configure them in there. You'll actually see what basically the JSON that would pass to the SDK and would eventually be used to run proof requests and to run issuances of credentials. Okay.
So sorry about the network not being appropriately sized, and our guru of that is asleep. It's like 2 in the morning back home, but he gets up early, so you never know. So So
All right.
take a break and then happy to see you after.